Tonight, Cardinal George Pell, a free man. The highest court in the country overturns his child sexual abuse convictions. A 23-year-old wildlife ranger mauled by a shark off Gladstone. A Queensland nurse tests positive to coronavirus as all cruise ships are ordered to leave our waters. And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson moved to intensive care as his condition worsens. Good evening, Matt Wordsworth with ABC News. Cardinal George Pell is a free man after the High Court overturned his convictions for the sexual abuse of choir boys in the 1990s. The judges were unanimous in their ruling, finding that the evidence at his trial did not establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It brings an end to 405 days behind bars for the man who was once special advisor to the Pope and tonight is staying in a Melbourne church property. Sarah Farnsworth begins our coverage.
This is the moment Cardinal George Pell became a free man. After serving more than 400 days in jail, he was driven out of Barwon Prison near Geelong and taken to a monastery in Melbourne's inner east. In a statement released immediately, George Pell said he'd suffered a serious injustice. "I hold no ill will towards my accuser," he said. "I do not want my acquittal to add to the hurt and bitterness so many feel. The point was whether I had committed these awful crimes, and I did not." The quashing of his 5 convictions for the sexual abuse of 2 choir boys nearly 20 years ago ends one of Australia's most contentious cases. His friends have always believed Cardinal Pell was innocent.
I had an understanding of the man, and my knowledge of him was when he said he was innocent, I accepted that.
But Melbourne's Catholic Archbishop said his thoughts were also with the complainant, known only as Witness J.
Have a sense of reaching out to him in care and concern.
The other choir boy in the case died in 2014. His father is heartbroken by the court's decision.
He has expressed disgust at the outcome and he's really struggling to understand it and to accept it.
Prosecutors allege the abuse of the choir boys took place here in the priest's sacristy at St Patrick's Cathedral shortly after a Sunday Mass, within a 5 to 6 minute window. But witnesses testified George Pell would never have been alone in the room, and his usual practice was to greet parishioners on the cathedral steps straight after Mass. The High Court ruled, with that evidence, a jury acting rationally ought to have entertained a doubt as to the Cardinal's guilt, even if they found his accuser to be credible and reliable. The court ordered his convictions be overturned.
The highest court in the land has made its decision, and that must be respected.
While this marks the end of the criminal case, Cardinal Pell and the Catholic Church could face a fresh wave of civil action. The ABC understands at least 10 civil cases are planned, and they can go ahead in the absence of a conviction. As for the Cardinal's former standing, some think his time at the Vatican is now over.
When he turns 80, of course, like all other cardinals, he loses his vote for the Pope.
From a cell to a sanctuary, George Pell is celebrating his first taste of freedom. Sarah Farnsworth, ABC News, Melbourne.
It's been 5 years since the child abuse allegations against Cardinal Pell were first made. He was charged in June 2017 and pleaded not guilty. In a secret trial in September 2018, a jury failed to reach a verdict. 2 months later, a second jury found him guilty on 5 counts of child sex abuse. A ban on reporting of the case was lifted in February last year when prosecutors dropped separate charges against George Pell. Last August, the Victorian Court of Appeal upheld the convictions. The Cardinal's final recourse was last month's High Court hearing, leading to today's acquittal. As Cheryl Hall reports, it's a case that continues to polarise public opinion.
George Pell is the highest-ranking Catholic to face a public trial. His acquittal is a relief for his supporters.
I really wouldn't want to say anything other than just let the judgment speak for itself.
But the ruling has wounded those dedicated to supporting survivors of clerical abuse.
Just devastating. Just devastating after everything that's happened.
Yeah, the court system is a difficult thing, and it just goes to show, today that even when you have got a verdict, then it can still be overturned.
The High Court decision has wiped out 5 years of police investigations and legal proceedings. Lawyers like Greg Craven have long argued the charges should not have gone to court.
A charge which always had a reasonable doubt a mile wide was pushed and hurried forward by sections of the media.
Australia's Catholic bishops welcomed the High Court decision but recognise the acquittal will be devastating for some. Any person with allegations of sexual abuse by church personnel should go to the police. The coronavirus lockdown has prevented Catholics from gathering together, but many are determined to revive their faith.
It's quite a challenge for believers. Many Catholics have lost faith in the leadership of the Church, perhaps not in Pope Francis, but in the local leadership. I think a lot of Catholics have. But that doesn't mean that we've given up on it.
Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews sent a brief message to every single victim and survivor of child sex abuse. I see you, I hear you, I believe you. Trauma services have already reported an influx of calls from child abuse survivors since the High Court decision. Cheryl Hall, ABC News.
A Queensland Parks and Wildlife Ranger has died after a shark attack on the southern Great Barrier Reef. 23-year-old Zachary Robber was swimming with his colleagues near an island off the coast of Gladstone when the shark attacked, causing critical injuries.
It was an afternoon swim that ended in tragedy. 23-year-old Queensland Parks and Wildlife Ranger Zachary Robber was attacked by a shark while swimming near Northwest Island on Monday evening. He sustained serious injuries to his limbs. His colleagues frantically tried to save him. The young man was flown to Gladstone Hospital, where he later died.
Our family out there is grieving for a young man who tragically has lost his life in a horrific shark attack.
Police say the 4 wildlife rangers had been doing maintenance work on the island prior to the attack.
There was 4 people swimming off the back of a boat, cooling down after a day's work, and this male person was the last person to get out of the water. As he was about to get on the boat, he was attacked by the shark.
It's the 3rd shark attack off the coast of Gladstone in the past 3 months. A 30-year-old man was bitten in December and a young girl received non-life-threatening injuries in January. Today, Zachary Robber's former high school paid tribute to the young man.
He'd worked hard and had a long dream to get to this job, and it's come really shortly after arriving there, but he'd worked hard, he cared for the environment.
The Environment Minister said the Ranger network is like a family, and we've lost a brother today. I send my deepest condolences to his parents and loved ones. A family grieving a life cut short. Rachel McGee, ABC News, Gladstone.
A nurse working with COVID-19 patients in Brisbane's Princess Alexandra Hospital is among those recently diagnosed with the coronavirus in Queensland. 6 other health staff who worked with her have been placed in isolation. With numbers still rising, the Premier has applauded Border Force for directing 9 cruise ships out of Queensland waters in a bid to prevent local hospitals becoming swamped.
Cruise ships like the Pacific Dawn are leaving our waters after getting their orders from Border Force.
To exit Queensland by tomorrow, 1 minute before midnight.
By the end of the week, 9 cruise ships will be gone and they won't be back anytime soon.
All of the cruise ships are leaving Queensland waters, so this is a very good result and one that I 100% back.
All major transport routes are grinding to a halt. Room is being made at the Brisbane airport until flights resume. Along the Queensland-New South Wales border, concrete barriers have been brought in to stop people crossing illegally, and car parks along the Gold Coast are being closed to keep day trippers away.
I can't stress enough that this COVID-19 is contagious.
Another 13 cases were identified in Queensland, bringing the total to 934. About 170 have recovered.
Our efforts today have been very successful due to the work done by every single Queenslander.
Good morning. Hello.
With winter approaching, some are taking the chance to get their flu shot at new pop-up clinics like this one on the Gold Coast.
They can come and have a face-to-face service without being sat in a crowded wait room amongst other people from the community.
Almost as quickly as transport hubs and public life began shutting down in Queensland, local manufacturers have jumped at the chance to ramp up production. Dozens of companies have struck a deal with the state government to deliver millions of dollars worth of emergency equipment. The government-backed Biofabrication Institute in Brisbane has teamed up with local companies to produce 3D printed masks for hospital staff. What they thought would take 3 weeks has been finished in 5 days. Josh Bavis, ABC News, Brisbane.
Australians are being urged to stay at home over Easter. The Prime Minister warning the nation risks undoing all the hard work done to flatten the curve. Scott Morrison's plea came as modelling was released, showing radical restrictions on our way of life are the best way of ensuring critically ill Australians receive the care they need. Political editor Andrew Probyn reports.
Minding the curve, now the necessary obsession.
We have so far avoided the horror scenarios that we have seen overseas.
Australia's curve, or infection rate, shows promise. Drastic measures appear to have arrested earlier signs of calamitous growth.
Quarantine and isolation and then social distancing, which we can dial up and down, have a major downward effect.
This has occurred quite rapidly, well beyond our expectations.
Scientists assessing what demands there might be for critical care in the months ahead. Their modelling has caveats. It's based on international data and isn't a prediction.
The next few weeks are absolutely crucial. We will see inevitably an increase in hospitalisations, admissions to ICU and deaths.
If the pandemic were left uncontrolled, the demand for intensive care beds would peak at 35,000 beds a day, about 28,000 more than Australia's ICU capacity. The second scenario assumes quarantine and isolation measures. This would see 17,000 Australians requiring ICU at the peak. About 10,000 would miss out. The third scenario models quarantine, isolation and social distancing measures, all of which have been implemented. Here, ICU demand peaks at just under 5,000 a day, which would be manageable.
Complacency is our biggest risk.
Those thinking of an Easter getaway told to think again.
We must keep the tension in the cord. Failure to do so this weekend would completely undo everything we have achieved so far together.
Eliminating the virus is not considered an option. The task instead, managing the infection so that those who need intensive care can get it. Flattening the curve will mean the outbreak lasts longer, although the PM hinted that those states that flatten the curve fastest will be the first to lift restrictions. But that's still months away. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
The United Kingdom is on edge with Prime Minister Boris Johnson moved into intensive care after his symptoms of coronavirus worsened. He was transferred to the unit after requiring oxygen. Europe correspondent Linton Besser reports.
It was a shock announcement. The Prime Minister moved into the intensive care unit of London's St Thomas Hospital. For over a month, Boris Johnson has faced this disease head on.
I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know washing your hands is the crucial thing. Happy birthday to you.
3 weeks later, he tested positive for COVID-19.
I've developed mild symptoms of the coronavirus, that's to say a temperature and a persistent cough.
And over the next few days, the public watched as his health deteriorated, even though he said he was feeling better last Friday.
Alas, I still have one of the symptoms, a minor symptom of I still have a temperature.
British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab has been asked to deputise when necessary.
Well, the government's business will continue, and the Prime Minister is in safe hands.
It was just so shocking to see that, because you know what that means. Intensive care is a big deal with regard to what we're talking about. That's a very big deal, very scary deal.
It is completely unimaginable, and we're not at the peak yet. We can't cope with a big spike, we just can't.
This unique look into another intensive care unit in London's University College Hospital provides a sense of the care that Boris Johnson is receiving.
I've been in intensive care nursing for about 23 years now, and I've never seen anything like this, even the London bombings.
Many of the patients are elderly, but not all.
In here we've got a mixture from people in their 40s to people in their 70s. A lot of them have got high blood pressure, but some of them are coming through who are young and fit.
All being cared for by those on the front line of Britain's health system, including the Prime Minister.
So the Prime Minister has now spent a night in intensive care. Linton Besser is at St Thomas's Hospital with this update.
The Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove, said this morning that Boris Johnson was not on a ventilator but had received oxygen support. And there were reports overnight that the PM required several litres of oxygen, but fewer than other more critical COVID-19 patients here at St Thomas's. But after strong assurances just hours before he was transferred into ICU that all was well and Mr Johnson remained in charge, there are real questions this morning about how forthright the government has been about his condition. And those questions will now inevitably turn to how prepared his cabinet is to run this country in his absence.
Students in Year 12 are facing challenges that have never been seen before, but after a meeting of federal and state education ministers today, they're being told they won't have to repeat their final year of school. Here's National Education reporter Connor Duffy.
The lounge room has replaced the classroom, and social distancing has killed rites of passage enjoyed by generations of school leavers.
We're not going to get those memories and experiences that like a normal Year 12 year group would. And yeah, it sucks really. It's really sad.
Alexia Osler is one of 180,000 Year 12 students learning a new system in their most important year of school. Her dream is to study medical engineering at university.
I hope that I'm able to still go because, you know, no one's going to want to repeat Year 12.
Today, state and federal ministers tried to ease that anxiety by devising a national plan for Year 12s. University admission scores could be adjusted to reflect the hardship.
We will take into account those students who have to learn from home.
More detail and certainty is still to come, but the path to university remains viable.
There will be no Year 13, there will be no mass repeating. You will get your leaving certificate this year.
Few know the Year 12 testing regime like Sydney University's Professor Jackie Manuel. She used to be New South Wales's chief examiner for English and says exams should be scrapped, like in the UK, where teachers will set a final mark.
I think the time is now to make that decision so that it removes the kind of uncertainty and higher levels of stress.
Paragraph 2.
The pandemic class of 2020 welcomes any relief from the pressure of isolation. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
Operators of family daycare centres are worried the government's free childcare plan has slashed their earnings in half. There's uncertainty within the sector about whether they'll be eligible for the JobKeeper payments.
Family daycare operators tend to be sole trader enterprises that plug an important gap in the childcare market. Providers are accredited and can care for up to 4 children in their own home, typically during non-standard work hours. It means their clients are often the children of night shift and weekend workers. The FDC sector says the government's plan to offer free childcare has slashed their income.
Our calculations may be incorrect. We're desperately hoping that they are. People on social media are saying, calm down, your calculations are incorrect.
The problem is this. Under the announcement, parents stop paying fees and the government reimburses providers 50% of all enrolments they had for the fortnight between the 17th of February and the 2nd of March. The plan doesn't at this stage recognise any new enrolments a provider may get after these dates. Providers are paid 50% of a capped rate, which is $11.10. So they're worried they'll only be paid $5.55 per hour per child, irrespective of the hours they work. What's more, they're worried they won't qualify for the JobKeeper payment of $1,500 a fortnight because many haven't seen the required 30% drop in their revenue.
It's packed no matter what the hours are with this package.
The sector's peak body, Family Daycare Australia, says they've taken the concerns to government, who have acknowledged that elements of the current package don't currently align with the family daycare model. The FDCA says free childcare may, in the short term, result in lower incomes for the family daycare sector.
The system is incredibly complex for family daycare. It relies on educator eligibility for the JobKeeper payment. And it absolutely relies on the service's capacity to apply for additional funding under the framework.
Additional funding that will be needed for family daycare to stay viable. Stephanie Zillman, ABC News.
More than 10,000 people have now died from coronavirus in the US as the country braces for the most difficult week of the outbreak so far. In New York, morgues are full, and one city councillor caused some panic when he tweeted there are contingency plans to temporarily bury victims in a park if the death rate doesn't drop. Mayor Bill de Blasio says things are not that bad yet, though funerals might have to be delayed.
We have an invisible enemy, we have a ferocious enemy, but this city is fighting back with everything we've got. And this is a strong city and a resilient city, and people are showing it in so many ways, and we're seeing it today at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Nurses gathered outside Harlem Hospital to demand greater access to protective equipment. New York State has been averaging around 600 deaths a day for the past 4 days. Still to come this hour, we go to the front line of the world's new coronavirus hotspot.
The amount of people sick and dying around us, it's really difficult. It's like battlefields triage out there right now.
We have many people that don't survive. Oh, it's incredibly traumatic.
Has Australia done enough to avoid a similar fate? That's coming up.
Queensland police have defended an officer who fatally shot a burning man who ran at them on Brisbane's south side overnight. It's alleged the 43-year-old had first doused himself and others in fuel at a house in Sunnybank Hills before driving to a nearby fast food outlet. Police say they tried to negotiate with him before he set himself on fire.
We will allege that he then ran at police and unfortunately it was necessary for a police officer to discharge his firearm on the man who was burning at the time.
The man died on the way to hospital. China has reported no new deaths from coronavirus for the first time since the crisis began. The number of new cases there has also dropped to only 32, all from people returning from overseas. But in neighbouring Japan, a state of emergency has been declared. North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer reports from Tokyo.
Life in the world's biggest city is shutting down. The number of coronavirus cases in Tokyo has more than doubled in the past week. More than 1,000 people are now infected. Residents want the new restrictions.
I think it is necessary to reduce victims and infected people.
I have a soap. I have a handle.
With more than 2 million views, Japanese social media celebrity Pico Taro is doing his bit to help stem the spread of the virus. It's a light-hearted reminder of the need for hand hygiene, but as the number of infections continues to rise, the Prime Minister is worried the health system will be overwhelmed.
We need further cooperation from citizens to minimise contact between people, which can lead to infections.
The state of emergency will cover Tokyo, Osaka and 5 other prefectures. It'll last for a month. Governors will have the powers to close schools and businesses, as well as ask people to stay at home.
In many ways, what's staying open and what's closing here in Tokyo is largely similar to what's already happened in Australia. Trains and public transport, that will remain operating. So too will supermarkets, daycares and convenience stores. But places like gyms, stadiums and theatres, they'll be shut.
As social distancing measures come into force, robots stood in for students at their university graduations. They celebrated in style from the comfort of their living rooms. Jake Sturmer, ABC News, Tokyo.
A slow-moving Category 5 cyclone has battered remote islands in the Pacific nation of Vanuatu. The extent of the damage isn't clear because Cyclone Harold brought down phone networks, but disaster officials on the ground say houses and food crops have been destroyed and heavy rain is causing flooding. The Vanuatu Red Cross Society says it's preparing for bad news. The Reserve Bank has left the official cash rate on hold at its regular meeting, which came just a fortnight after its emergency cut to a record low. Here's Alan Kohler.
Well, having cut the cash rate between meetings to 0.25%, there was never going to be another rate cut today. But the Reserve Bank did say it's now bought about $36 billion worth of government bonds on the market, injecting that much freshly made money into the system. Governor Philip Lowe said today they'll keep doing that, but smaller and less frequent purchases will be required, he reckons. The Australian dollar popped up to 61.5 US cents, but that was mainly because the US dollar fell. And that happened despite a massive rise on the New York stock market last night. 7.7% by the Dow Jones average and 7% by the S&P 500. There have only been 31 such moves, up or down, since 1927, 6 of them in the past month. The local market started the day higher because of that and then sagged as the day wore on, which is understandable. Share trading is tiring these days. The All Ordinaries closed 0.4% lower, and Flight Centre, which relisted after 12 days on the bench, was among the biggest risers, up 12%, while falls included Telstra, ASX and Cochlear. On commodity markets, oil fell back, but gold jumped 2.5%. And finally, here are some charts from ANZ Research showing how society is changing. Demand for travel services has almost disappeared, but demand for home office and home entertainment has soared. The fall in restaurants has been more than offset by the rise in grocery sales. And fitness clubs are in trouble, but sales of home gym equipment have gone through the roof. And that's finance.
The Great Barrier Reef is experiencing its most widespread coral bleaching on record. Unlike previous years, this event is affecting the northern, central and southern sections of the reef. Mass bleaching is caused by warm water, and it was first seen on the reef in 1997. Now it's happened 3 times in the past 5 years, with half the reef's coral dying after bleachings in 2016 and 2017. Professor Terry Hughes led the surveys and says climate change is driving more regular bleaching.
We're getting less and less time for a decent recovery, a bounce back of the corals after each of these bleaching events. That takes about a decade for a full recovery.
Scientists will return later this year to assess the long-term damage. Weather now with Ashley Stevenson.
Matt, not a lot of activity on the radar today. The highest rainfall total was 26 millimetres at Palmerville in the far north. Low Isles recorded 13. Otherwise, a clear day across the state. Temperatures are still below average in the southwest and southern interior. Roma dropped to single digits early this morning, 11 the minimum in St George and then a top of 26, 29 the top in Mackay and 28 for Bundaberg. A couple of clouds about the capital today with a top of 29, slightly cooler on the bay side with the Redlands topping 27. Zooming out, low cloud is building along the New South Wales coast while an upper level disturbance is triggering this extensive cloud over the western interior of the continent. On the chart, the high in the Bight will strengthen as it moves eastwards. It's going to generate southeasterly onshore winds, so we'll see a few showers persisting along the east coast, including for us in Queensland. Meanwhile, Tropical Cyclone Harold is going to weaken slightly into a Category 4 system as it moves towards Fiji's southern islands in coming days. Now to the capital, showers for Sydney and 21, a shower or two in Canberra and chilly on 18, partly cloudy in Hobart and heading for 17, mostly sunny in Perth and 33. Home to Queensland, there's the chance of an isolated shower or storm near an inland trough that extends from Normanton down near Winton. Showers are possible too for the southeast coast with those onshore winds. To forecast a mostly fine day in the north, just that possible shower for Normanton and 31, 30 for Proserpine and 31 the top in Rocky. Not quite as cool as it has been inland, but still below average, 31 for Windora, 27 in Charleville, sunny in St Lawrence and 28. In the southeast, showers are possible for coastal parts. If we do see rain, it will only be a few millimetres. Fairly cool under the cloud though, 25 the top for the Sunshine Coast and 26 in Gympie. In Brisbane, a possible shower for us and a top of 27, mostly fine for Ipswich. On Moreton Bay, winds south to southeasterly 20 knots, seas about 1 metre, sunrise at 1 minute past 6. And looking ahead, you might need to add water the garden to the chore list because it's looking pretty dry for the weekend. A top of 28 in Brisbane on Sunday. Matt?
Thanks, Ash. That's news to the moment. Up next, 7:30 with Lee Sars.